Summer sat at the far head of the table, her long blonde hair contrasting strikingly with her green skin and marked by a single crystal embedded in the protruding bone of her forehead, a characteristic shared by all Lunarians. Gus sat alone at the other end of the table, wondering why the kind green woman had invited him to her castle. She had been bringing him homemade food for the past few months, ever since he had saved her from a giant lizard on the plains of this Federation-owned planet. He had a strong suspicion that she was about to share her feelings for him, the mercenary who had done nothing more than protect the locals to fulfill a contract. Summer brushed her blonde hair away from the yellow crystal in her forehead, the movement deliberate and graceful, as if she wanted to ensure he could see her face clearly. How are you finding the food?" she asked. Gus lifted his fork to spear a slice of meat, carefully dipping it into the vibrant blue sauce that he still couldn't identify, but had grown to enjoy over their many shared meals. He placed it in his mouth, chewing thoughtfully as the familiar flavors danced across his palate. A genuine smile spread across his weathered face as he swallowed. "It's delicious, as always." Summer's face lit up with a pleased smile. The blue sauce is actually my sister Winter's recipe," she said, proud of her sister. "Oh, I'm so glad you enjoy it." But even as she spoke, Gus noticed her claws tapping constantly against the table surface, a nervous habit he'd never seen from her before. The sound was soft, but persistent, and something in her posture had shifted. He could almost feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air between them, sensing that she was on the verge of saying something that would shatter the comfortable routine of their usual dinner conversations. Summer's claws stopped their nervous tapping abruptly. Is it true that humans don't care about interspecies romance?" she asked, the words tumbling out faster than she seemed to intend. She quickly clarified, her green cheeks darkening slightly. I've been hearing rumors from the village girls. They say the human engineer took a Lunarian as his mate, and no one batted an eye at their relationship." Her yellow crystal seemed to glow faintly as she leaned forward slightly. Is that true?" Gus set down his fork, the metal clinking softly against the plate. His fingers unconsciously traced the scar beside his eye as his mind drifted back to that day on the plains. The massive lizard's claws slashing through the air, Summer's terrified cry, the desperate leap that had left him marked but saved her life. He considered her question about interspecies relationships, weighing his words carefully. "Overall, it's seen in a good light," he admitted, then couldn't resist a slight grin as he looked across the table at her. "Are you asking because you've fallen for a certain mercenary?" Her green face flushed a deeper shade, the color spreading from her cheeks down her neck. For a long moment she said nothing, her fingers nervously playing with the top button of her shirt, her cleavage highlighting the fact Lunarians were also mammals. The silence stretched between them, and it lasted a few moments. When she finally looked up again, her crystal seemed to glow with the same accelerated beat of her heart. She lifted her gaze to meet his eyes directly, gathering her courage like armor around her. You may take me as your mate, human," she said, her voice steady despite the flush still coloring her features. She paused, then added with a slight tilt of her chin, "But my sisters refuse to be excluded." Gus blinked, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth as confusion washed over his features. "Wait, sisters?" he said, setting the utensil down with a clatter. "Interspecies is one thing, but that—" His words trailed off, hanging incomplete in the air between them. The awkwardness seemed to fill the room like a heavy fog, and he watched as Summer's newfound confidence visibly crumbled, her shoulders sagging slightly as uncertainty flickered across her green features. She looked down at her plate, pushing the food around with her fork, without meeting his eyes. You can either have all of us, or none," she said quietly, then seemed to draw strength from somewhere deep within. Her voice grew steady as she continued. My sisters and I have agreed on something. She set down her fork and looked up at him with renewed determination. You should meet them, one by one, today, and tonight we'll all be waiting for you in the capella of the castle, together. You can either leave and never see us again, or come to us and accept us all. Summer rose from her seat with fluid grace and walked toward the old stone staircase. She placed one foot on the first worn step, then paused without turning around. Sister Fall is waiting for you in the garden. She'll explain why we all need to be together. I'll be showering first, then waiting in the cupola. As she began climbing the stairs, her voice drifted down to him. Choose well. Gus sat alone at the dining table, staring at Summer's abandoned plate as her footsteps faded into the upper reaches of the castle. His mind reeled with confusion, trying to process what had just transpired. Was this some kind of fidelity test? Some elaborate cultural ritual he didn't understand? The mercenary in him analyzed every angle, searching for hidden motives or potential traps. 4 sisters, assuming there was one for each season, all wanting him as a mate. It sounded like something from a fever dream or the twisted imagination of a teenager. Yet Summer's nervousness had been genuine, her vulnerability real. There was something deeper here, something he couldn't grasp from their brief exchange. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the stone floor. Whatever game this was, whatever cultural complexity he'd stumbled into, he needed answers. The alternative was to walk away, to leave this castle and never look back. But the memory of Summer's flushed face, the way her crystal had shone for him, kept him rooted in place. If he was going to make a decision that would affect all their lives, he needed to understand what he was choosing between. His decision crystallized in his mind like ice forming on a window. He would go to the garden. He would meet this Fall, hear what she had to say, and try to piece together the puzzle that had been thrust upon him. The journey through the castle felt surreal, as if he were walking through someone else's dream. He left the dining room through the same archway Summer had disappeared beyond, but turned toward the garden entrance she'd mentioned. The corridors were lined with tapestries depicting Lunarian history, scenes of their people's migration to this world, their integration with Federation society. The stone staircase leading to the garden was different from the one Summer had climbed, older, more weathered, with moss growing between the cracks. Each step took him further from the familiar world of contracts and credits, deeper into something that felt ancient and mysterious. At the bottom, heavy wooden doors opened into a courtyard that took his breath away. It was a place of falling leaves and the subtle sweetness of late-blooming flowers, and there, on a stone bench beneath the gentle cascade of falling foliage, sat a solitary figure. As Gus approached, he could make out more details of the woman who must be Fall. Her crystal absorbed the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves, not the warm yellow of Summer's, but a rich amber that seemed to hold the very essence of autumn within its faceted surface. Her hair was a cascade of russet and gold, longer even than Summer's, falling in gentle waves that moved with each breath of wind. She wore a dress the color of autumn leaves, and when she looked up at his approach, her eyes held the deep, contemplative sadness. "You came," she said, rising gracefully from the bench. Her voice was more gentle than Summer's, like wind through dying leaves. "I wondered if you would." "Your sisters made it clear I had a choice to make," Gus replied, stopping a respectful distance away. "I figured I should understand what I'm choosing between." Fall smiled, an expression tinged with melancholy that was somehow beautiful. "Understanding, yes, that's what we need from you." She gestured to the bench. "Will you sit with me? This is awkward, I know. Summer was nervous for days about tonight, and I suspect she didn't explain things as clearly as she intended." Gus settled beside her on the cool stone, acutely aware of her presence, the way she held herself with quiet dignity, the subtle scent of autumn spices that seemed to cling to her skin. She mentioned you'd explain why you all need to be together. Need, Fall repeated, as if tasting the word. Yes, that's accurate. Not want, though we do want it. Need. She was quiet for a moment, watching the leaves spiral down around them. Do you know anything about Lenarian birth customs, Gus? Not much, he admitted. Twins are rare among our people. Triplets, almost unheard of. Quadruplets. She shook her head. We were the first in recorded Lenarian history. Our birth was treated as either a miracle or a curse, depending on who you asked. But as we grew, it became clear we were neither. We were broken. The word hung in the air between them, like a confession. Broken? That's a bit too harsh to say, Gus said gently. Fall's fingers played among the falling leaves that had gathered on the bench. Each of us was born with only a fragment of what makes a Lenarian whole. Summer feels joy, love, hope, all the bright emotions that make life worth living. But she struggles with deeper feelings, with the complexity that comes from experiencing the full spectrum of emotion. I feel melancholy, contemplation, the bittersweet beauty of endings. But joy eludes me except through our shared link. Spring, when you meet her, will overwhelm you with energy and passion, but she lacks the temperance that comes with understanding consequence. And winter, Fall's voice softened. Winter feels the cold emotions. Logic, duty, sorrow. She cannot experience happiness at all, save through our connection. A psychic link, Gus said, understanding beginning to dawn. More than that, we share consciousness, emotion, experience. When summer laughs, I feel the echo of that joy. When I contemplate the beauty of decay, she understands it through my eyes. We are 4 parts of one whole, and separately, we are incomplete. Fall turned to face him directly. Do you understand what that means for us? In Lenarian society, romantic bonding is sacred, exclusive. The idea of sharing a mate with others is not just unusual, it's forbidden. We could never find partners among our own people, not when bonding with one of us would mean accepting the psychic presence of 3 others. The implications hit Gus like a physical blow. You've been alone. Completely. As children, it was different. Our connection was seen as quaint, even beneficial, but as we matured, as the expectations of adult life pressed on us, Fall's voice trailed off. We became outcasts, too strange for normal society, too bound to each other to ever truly belong anywhere else. What changed now? Gus asked quietly. You, she said. Summer's been watching you for months. And through her, we all felt overwhelming joy. Your kindness, your strength, the way you look at her, trying to hide your obvious desire, we all felt that. Fall rose from the bench and held out her hand. I know this is overwhelming. I know it's not what you expected when you accepted Summer's dinner invitation. But before you decide, I want to share something with you. A dance. Gus looked at her extended hand, then at her face, beautiful in its sadness, hopeful despite the melancholy that seemed to define her. I'm not much of a dancer. Neither am I, she smiled. But the leaves are falling, and autumn is my season. Let me show you what I am, who we are, before you choose. He took her hand, and she led him to a small clearing where the falling leaves created a natural carpet beneath their feet. There was no music save the whisper of wind through branches, the gentle rustle of leaves, but Fall moved as if she could hear a symphony. She guided him in a slow, simple dance, nothing elaborate, just swaying movement that matched the rhythm of the falling foliage around them. As they danced, she spoke. Summer's happiness when she cooks for you. When she sees you smile, I feel it too. It's like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. And through me, spring feels... it has excitement, has possibility. Even Winter feels it as a warming of the eternal cold she carries. You've already begun to heal us, just by accepting Summer's friendship. The dance continued, and Gus found himself drawn into the strange beauty of the moment. The woman in his arms was alien, yes, but there was something achingly familiar about her sadness, her hope, her careful grace. When the dance finally ended, they stood close together, her amber crystal catching the light like a small sun. Fall raised her hand to touch his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt. Her nostrils flared slightly as she breathed in his scent, and something shifted in her expression, a deepening of interest that had been building throughout their conversation. "You're strong," she murmured, her fingers tracing the contours of his shoulders. "Not just physically, your spirit, your heart. Summer chose well." She stepped back slightly, her gaze meeting his directly. "I approve of you, Gus, and my approval combined with Summer's carries weight among my sisters. We are the voices of reason, the ones who think before acting." The familiar pattern began to emerge as Fall's expression grew distant, formal. "Tonight we'll all be waiting for you in the cupola, all four of us, together. You can walk away from this castle and never see us again. We'll understand, and bear you no ill will. Or you can come to us and accept what we're offering. All of us, or none of us." She began to move away from him, toward a different path that led back to the castle. At the entrance to the path, she paused and looked back, her amber crystal pulsing gently. "I need to shower and prepare myself for tonight, and you need to meet Sister Winter in the basement. She has more to tell you." As she disappeared into the shadows of the path, her final words drifted back to him like falling leaves. "Choose well." Gus stood alone in the garden, watching the last traces of fall disappear into the castle shadows. The autumn leaves continued their gentle descent around him, but the beauty of the moment felt distant now, overshadowed by the weight of what he'd learned. Four sisters bound together by necessity rather than choice, each carrying only fragments of a complete emotional spectrum. Their tragic story made sense of Summer's nervousness, of the strange proposition that had left him so confused. He ran his hand through his hair, trying to process the magnitude of what they were asking. It wasn't just about romantic involvement. It was about becoming part of a family of four sisters who were utterly codependent. The mercenary in him wanted to analyze it like any other contract, weigh the risks and benefits. But this went deeper than anything he'd ever been asked to consider. These weren't just four women who happened to be sisters. They were four pieces of one fractured soul, asking him to become a part of their world. The decision to meet Winter felt inevitable now. He'd come this far, learnt this much. Walking away without understanding the full scope of their situation would be cowardice. Besides, Fall's description of Winter had stirred something protective in him. A woman who could only taste happiness, but never truly feel it, who carried the burden of cold logic, while her sisters experienced the warmth of emotion. What would she truly be like? The basement proved more difficult to find than the garden had been. Gus wandered through several wrong corridors before discovering a narrow staircase tucked behind an unremarkable door near the castle's foundation. As he descended, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the warm light of the upper levels gave way to a scarce illumination that seemed to leach color from everything it touched. The basement was exactly what he'd expected from Fall's description of Winter. Austere, functional, devoid of warmth. The walls were bare stone, the floor polished concrete. The only furniture was a simple desk, 4 chairs, and shelves lined with books and technical manuals. Near a single narrow window, barely larger than a porthole, sat a solitary cactus in a plain ceramic pot. Its presence seemed almost defiant in the sterile environment, the only sign of life in a space that felt more like a laboratory than a living quarters. Winter sat in a straight-backed chair near the window, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap, As Gus approached, he could see the family resemblance to her sisters, but where they radiated warmth and life, she seemed carved from ice. Her skin held the same green hue, but paler. Her hair fell in perfect waves, the color of fresh snow, and the crystal in her forehead gleamed like a diamond, cold and brilliant and absolutely beautiful. "You came," she said without looking up from the book in her lap. Her voice was crisp, utterly without inflection. "I calculated a high chance that you wouldn't continue after meeting Fall." "Your sister thought we should talk," Gus replied, stopping a few feet away. He felt awkward standing while she sat, but something in her posture suggested she wouldn't appreciate him taking a seat uninvited. "My sisters have many thoughts about what would be beneficial for me," Winter said, finally closing her book and looking up at him. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter sky, intelligent but distant. "I want to be clear from the beginning. I have no personal interest in you. This meeting is occurring because Summer and Fall insisted it would be good for me to participate in their arrangement. They love to convince me to try new experiences." Her bluntness was startling after Fall's gentle melancholy, but Gus found it oddly refreshing. "I understand. This is all very new and strange to me, too. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say or do in this situation." "You're supposed to listen," Winter replied matter-of-factly. "Fall told you our origin story, explained our connection and why we cannot bond with our own kind. I am to provide the details of our suffering, as she put it, though I consider it simply historical fact." "All right," Gus said. "I'm listening." Winter was quiet for a moment, her gaze returning to the narrow window where grey light filtered through. "Our parents abandoned us when we were 13 years old," she said without preamble. "They couldn't cope with what we'd become. 4 broken daughters who would never marry, who were never truly separate, never truly individuals. The psychic link that had seemed charming in childhood became disturbing as we approached adolescence." "Abandoned you?" Gus felt his chest tighten. "Just left you?" "Officially, they sent us to a boarding institution for exceptional Lenarian youth. Unofficially, they signed away all parental rights and disappeared. All they left us was this place." Winter's voice remained steady, clinical, but Gus could see the tension in her shoulders. Summer was unusually quiet. Fall retreated into herself. Spring became wild, uncontrollable. I managed. "How?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. "Because sadness doesn't scare me, and I accept it," Winter replied simply. "Summer and Fall essentially raised us all, but someone needed to handle the practical matters, the finances, the decisions that required logic rather than emotion. I felt duty, responsibility, the necessity of survival." "That's a hell of a burden for a 13-year-old. "Yes," she agreed. "It was. The hardships were significant. We had very little money, no family support, no understanding from the institution staff about her unique needs. During those times, I could feel my sister's anguish adding to mine, as if it were physical pain. But I could only respond with logic, with plans, with cold comfort." Gus found himself moving closer, drawn by something vulnerable beneath her icy composure. "Fall said the connection saved you." "Many times," Winter confirmed. "When my despair became too overwhelming, Summer's happiness is always there as a counterpart. When Fall's melancholy threatened to consume her, Summer's hope kept her anchored. When Spring's recklessness put her in danger, Fall's contemplation and my caution pulled her back. We survived because we were never truly alone, even when we were physically separated." "But you never got to feel their happiness as your own," Gus said quietly. For the first time, something flickered across Winter's perfect features, a momentary crack in her composure. "I can taste it," she said, like someone describing the flavor of something sweet when you've never had sugar. "I know Summer is happy when she laughs. I can sense the warmth of it through our link, but it remains foreign to me, borrowed, not mine." The admission lingered in the air between them, and Gus felt his heart break a little for this woman who carried herself with such dignity while being denied one of life's most basic experiences. "For what it's worth," he said carefully, "I don't think you got the short end of the stick in any department. You're every bit as beautiful as your sisters." Winter's pale eyes widened slightly, as if the compliment had genuinely surprised her. "You're either lying to be kind, or you have unusual tastes. My sisters radiate life, warmth, passion. I am cold." "Cold doesn't mean less beautiful," Gus said, taking another step closer. "Just different. Like winter itself. Harsh, maybe, but there's something stunning about it. Pure." He held out his arms in a gesture of invitation. "Would you accept a hug? You look like you could use one." Winter stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I don't see the purpose in physical comfort rituals." "Sometimes there doesn't need to be a purpose," Gus said gently. "Sometimes it just helps." After what felt like an eternity, Winter stood and stepped into his embrace with obvious reluctance, but once his arms closed around her, something seemed to shift. Her rigid posture softened slightly, and she allowed herself to lean against him, her head resting against his chest. They stood like that in the cold basement room, surrounded by the sterile environment she'd created, while time passed. "Your heart rate is elevated," she murmured against his shirt. "Probably," he admitted. "The whole situation is pretty overwhelming." "For me as well," she said quietly, "though I'm not certain I'm processing it correctly." They remained in the embrace for several more minutes, neither wanting to be the first to break the unexpected moment of connection. When Winter finally stepped back, her expression had softened marginally. "I find that I can accept your existence in our lives," she said with characteristic directness. "Summer's happiness when she speaks of you does improve my daily experience, though I cannot fully comprehend why. I remain uncertain about physical involvement, should tonight proceed as my sisters hope. But I have agreed to participate in their plan, and I intend to keep my promise." She moved toward the staircase with the same measured grace she'd shown throughout their conversation. "My sisters insist I spend too much time in this basement, isolated from the warmth above. Perhaps they are correct. I will shower and join you all tonight." At the foot of the stairs, she paused and looked back at him, her diamond crystal catching the harsh light. "You should seek out Spring next. Her room is beside the kitchen. You cannot miss it, as she rarely remembers to close their door, and her music can be heard throughout that wing of the castle." As she began climbing the stairs, her final words drifted down to him with crystalline clarity. "Choose well." Gus stood in the empty basement after Winter's departure, her final words echoing in the sterile air. 3 sisters, 3 fragments of a broken whole, each carrying burdens that would have destroyed lesser beings. Summer's desperate hope, Fall's melancholic wisdom, Winter's cold logic masking deep pain. And now he was meant to meet the 4th piece of this impossible puzzle, Spring, who Fall had described as overwhelming energy and passion without the temperance of consequence. He revisited the memory of their story. These weren't just 4 women seeking a romantic partner. They were survivors of abandonment, outcasts who had raised themselves from childhood, bound together by necessity and a psychic connection that made them pariahs among their own kind. And somehow, through some cosmic joke or genuine miracle, they had chosen him, a simple mercenary who had done nothing more than his job, to share their life with. The question that haunted him as he climbed back toward the main levels of the castle was simple. Was he worthy of that trust? Could he be what they needed him to be? Following the music proved as easy as Winter had promised. The moment Gus reached the kitchen level, he could hear it. Wild, energetic melodies, growing louder as he moved down the corridor. The sound drew him like a beacon, until he stood before a door that hung wide open, music spilling out along with warm light and the scent of flowers. Spring's room was a revelation after the boredom of Winter's basement, where Winter's space had been austere and cold. This was an explosion of life and color. Plants cascaded from every available surface. flowering vines that climbed the walls, potted blooms that crowded the windowsills, hanging gardens that swayed gently in the breeze from an open window. Clothes were scattered across furniture. Books lay open on every surface. It was a mess. But despite the overwhelming presence of life in the room, Gus couldn't see Spring herself anywhere. He stepped carefully over a pile of what looked like dance costumes, scanning the vibrant chaos for any sign of the fourth sister. "Hello?" he called out, raising his voice over the music. The response came from the last place he expected. As he approached the bed, a massive four-poster draped with colorful fabrics and piled high with blankets and pillows. The entire mound of bedding exploded into motion. Spring launched herself from the tangle of covers like a missile, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing her lips to his before he could even register what was happening. The kiss was everything Fall had warned him about. Passionate, overwhelming, completely without restraint. It lasted long enough for Gus to feel dizzy, his hands instinctively coming up to steady himself against her shoulders as she poured what felt like months of pent-up energy into the contact. When she finally pulled back, laughing breathlessly, he got his first clear look at the final sister. Her skin held the same green tone as the others, but seemed to glow with an inner vitality that made her appear lit from within. Her hair was a cascade of bright pink that vaguely reminded him of silk, and the crystal in her forehead gleamed with the same vibrant hue, the color of cherry blossoms, of sunrise, of everything young and alive and hopeful. "So you're our boyfriend," she announced, still hanging from his neck, her legs wrapped around his waist in a way that felt deliberate. "I've been waiting forever to meet you. Well, not forever, but it feels like forever when your sisters won't let you do anything fun." "Spring, Gus began, but she was already launching into an animated explanation, her words tumbling over each other in their eagerness to be heard. "It's so frustrating, you know. They never let me go to the village, and they never let anyone come visit, and I have to approve everything before I can even think about it. Fo says it's because I don't think about the consequences, and Winter says it's because I lack impulse control, and Summer just worries about everything all the time." She finally unwound herself from around him, bouncing on her toes with endless energy. "But I understand why they do it. I know it's for my protection. I just wish they trusted me more." What story were you supposed to tell me?" Gus asked, trying to keep up with her rapid-fire speech. Spring's expression shifted, becoming almost conspiratorial. "Oh, they didn't trust me to explain anything important. They think I'll get distracted or say the wrong thing." She leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "But I know why they saved me for last." Why?" Her grin was pure mischief. "Because they know I can make sure you won't leave this castle tonight. Or ever." Before Gus could ask her to explain, Spring had launched herself at him again, but this time her approach was different, more predatory, more focused. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders and began trailing kisses along his ear, her breath warm against his skin. The kisses moved down to his neck, soft and insistent, and he felt her claws pressing against his back through his shirt, not painfully, but with enough pressure to remind him of her alien nature, her strength. His heart hammered against his ribs as she continued her assault on his senses, every nerve ending alive with awareness of her touch, her scent, the way she moved against him like liquid fire. He was dimly aware that he should stop this, should maintain some distance, but the combination of her passionate attention and the emotional weight of everything he'd learnt about the sisters was making it hard to think clearly. Then, as suddenly as it begun, she stopped. She stepped back, leaving him breathless and confused, her pink crystal shining in satisfaction. "See?" she said simply, offering no further explanation. The familiar pattern began to emerge as Spring's playful expression grew more serious. "Tonight we'll all be waiting for you in the cupola. All four of us, together. You can walk away from this castle and never see us again. Or you can come to us and accept what we're offering. All of us, or none of us." She moved toward the door with the same fluid grace as her sisters, pausing at the threshold to look back at him, Her pink crystal was alive with the music still playing in her room. "I'll be in the cupola with the others. I'm not going to shower. I hope you don't mind." As she disappeared into the corridor, her final words floated back to him with musical clarity. "Choose well." Gus moved to the corridor outside Spring's room, the echo of her final words still ringing in his ears. Before him stretched two paths, the hallway leading to the castle's main entrance, and the stone staircase that would take him up to the cupola, where four sisters waited for his decision. The weight of the choice pressed down on him more than he would dare to admit, making each breath feel labored. Accepting them meant more than just romantic involvement. It meant becoming part of something partially broken, taking responsibility for four souls who had been abandoned by everyone, who should have protected them. It meant leaving behind the simple life of a mercenary, the freedom to move from contract to contract, without emotional entanglement. His life would be bound to theirs, his future intertwined with their lifelong healing. The magnitude of that responsibility was staggering. These weren't just four women seeking love. They were fragments of something that had never been whole, asking him to share life with them. Summer's desperate hope, fall's melancholic wisdom, winter's cold logic masking deep pain, spring's overwhelming passion without restraint. Could he be what all of them needed? Could he love them, not just as individuals, but as the collective entity they truly were? The question that tormented him was whether what he felt was genuine love, or simply overwhelming lust. Spring's passionate assault on his senses still burnt in his memory, the way her body had pressed against his, the heat of her kisses. Summer's nervous beauty as she unbuttoned her shirt, revealing a bit, but not all. Fall's graceful sadness as they danced among the falling leaves. Even winter's cold perfection had stirred something protective and possessive in him. But was it love? Or was he just a lonely man responding to the attention of four beautiful women who had made it clear they wanted him? The thought shamed him, made him question his own motives. They deserved better than someone who couldn't distinguish between love and desire. He found himself walking toward the front door, his steps echoing in the empty corridor. The massive wooden portal grew larger as he approached, until he stood before it with his hand extended toward the iron handle. This was his escape route, the path back to the familiar world of contracts and credits and uncomplicated solitude. His fingers closed around the cold metal, knuckles white with the force of his grip. One turn, one pull, and he would be free of this impossible choice. The handle felt heavy, and he waited. "Fuck," he whispered to the empty air. His hand fell away from the handle, as if it had burnt him. The word echoed in the corridor, a confession of defeat, of inability to walk away from something that might destroy him, but that he couldn't abandon. These women had trusted him with their deepest vulnerability, their life stories. Whatever his motives, whatever the cost to his simple life, he couldn't betray that trust. The climb to the cupola felt like a shameful retreat, each step an admission that he was too weak to make the hard choice. A dozen steps down that corridor felt like a mile. With each footfall, he could hear voices from beyond the door, soft, gentle, almost like oil. As he drew closer, the words became clear. "Oh, he's been gone too long," Summer's voice, tight with worry. "What if he's already left? What if—" "Peace, sister," Fall's deeper tones, trying to comfort. "He will come, or he won't. We cannot force this choice." "I told you should have let me meet him naked," Spring's voice, petulant. "I could have convinced him." "This is not about convincing." Winter's crisp voice cut through the chatter. "Either he accepts what we are, or he doesn't." But beneath Winter's logical words, Gus could hear the tremor of uncertainty, the fear that even she couldn't completely suppress. He stood before the door for a long moment, his hand hovering over the handle. This was it, the moment that would define the rest of his life. Once he opened this door, there would be no going back. No pretending this was just another contract, to be completed and forgotten. The handle felt warm beneath his palm, much lighter than the other. The door swung open, revealing a circular room flooded with starlight from windows that surrounded the cupola. 4 figures turned toward him, 3 faces breaking into radiant smiles, and one offering a carefully controlled half-smile that nonetheless held unmistakable relief. "I'm here," he said simply, stepping across the threshold and into his new life. The next morning, when the first ray of dawn crept through the eastern windows of the cupola, Gus stirred slowly, awareness returning like tide pools filling with morning light. The events of the night felt dreamlike in their intensity, passion and tenderness intertwined. 4 souls reaching out to touch his through barriers of species and circumstance. Summer lay curled against his left side, her yellow crystal dim in sleep, her face peaceful in a way he'd never seen while she was awake. Her smile was partially hidden beneath the blanket they shared, but it was there. Genuine contentment that made his chest tight with unexpected emotion. Fall occupied his right side. Her autumn-colored hair spread across the pillow like spilt wine, her melancholic beauty softened by satisfaction and rest. The pain in his chest had a specific source. Spring had claimed him as her personal pillow sometime during the night, her pink hair tickling his chin as she lay sprawled across him with complete abandon. Her arms were wrapped around his torso possessively, and every breath he took had to work around her weight. He didn't have the heart to move her. Winter sat alone at the edge of the massive bed, her back straight, her white hair perfectly arranged, despite the night's activities. She stared out at the dawn with her usual composed expression, but Gus could see the subtle changes in her posture, the way her shoulders had lost some of their rigid tension. The woman who had gotten swept away by her sister's emotional ways during the night was carefully rebuilding her walls, but the foundation had shifted irreversibly. As consciousness fully returned, Gus realized with startling clarity that his future had been decided the moment he walked through that door. His wandering days were over. His simple life as a lone mercenary finished. He was bound now to these 4 remarkable women, responsible for their healing, part of their strange and beautiful whole. The L word still felt too large and complicated to fully grasp, but looking at their sleeping faces, feeling the weight of spring against his chest and the warmth of summer and fall at his sides, watching winter's careful solitude that no longer seemed quite so cold, he knew it was just a matter of time before that word became as natural as breathing. His future stretched before him, complex, challenging, and utterly uncertain. But for the first time in years, uncertainty didn't feel like a burden. It felt like something to look forward to.